Hi, I'm James Roy. I'd like to add my welcome to the one you just had. And we're going to spend the next 60 minutes discussing this topic and sharing some strategies and some best practices and some tips that you can apply to your own role in your own organization. Before we start, just a heads up that this webinar is the last of 4 that we're delivering in a series called Evaluation and Stakeholder Engagement. So the information presented today, as was just mentioned, is available or will be available shortly on the OrgWise website. The other ones are already there. And they're on the topics of evaluation, compliance, and strengthening communities. So near the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions if you haven't typed any in during. And if we don't have any questions today, there'll be an opportunity to follow up at a Q&A session this Friday at 10. And we'll mention that again later. So, again, I'm James Roy, and my colleague is Laura Buenaventura, and we'll be sharing this webinar today. We'll be back and forth a bit on things. So I'm just going to briefly take you through the agenda. So we're going to do some setup. We're going to set the stage a little bit. We're going to look at systemic issues impacting immigrants and refugees. We're going to look at some of the standard indicators that OrgWise has created. We're going to look at some best practices in addressing barriers. We have a sample tool or two, and we'll do a brief wrap-up and send you on your way for the rest of your day. So first of all, a quick poll, and this is just for us to get a sense of how you fit into your organization, who you are. So if you could press the appropriate number on your screen, or click on the appropriate number on your screen, we'll just see who's out there, and then we'll carry on. So we'll just wait a minute or two. So we're just waiting while we compile the results here. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm sure you are. Ah, 100% staff members. Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's actually good. I'm sorry to say the Prime Minister has not joined us today, so it's just staff members. That's wonderful. Thank you. So we'll move on and look at some issues to consider. So organizations that support immigrants and refugees must deal with multiple challenges and constraints, and we're just going to look through and talk about a few of these. You're probably fairly familiar with these, but depending on your situation, some may be less an issue in your organization than in others. So first of all, we're dealing with historic high levels of immigrant settlement. We're living in an increasingly globalized marketplace, which won't be a surprise to you, and immigration remains central to our growth as a nation. The latest data we have says that Canada is home to 6.8 million foreign-born residents, 20.6% of the population. There are now more foreign-born people in the country than ever before, at a proportion not seen in almost a century, and that's pretty amazing. According to Stats Canada, immigration represents close to 70% of our current population growth, and that's up from under 20% in 1976. 80% of all immigrants arriving between 1991 and 2001 live in Canada's 5 largest urban centres. And I know you're not all in urban centres, but the Toronto metropolitan area alone is home to 43% of all recent immigrants. There's an increasing diversity of background and life experiences within the immigrant and refugee community. And this, of course, impacts the settlement sector. As the makeup of the communities we serve becomes increasingly diverse and complex. Basic services are still not accessible to all newcomers. And our challenge, of course, is to be responsive, proactive, relevant, and effective in meeting the needs of our immigrants. And accessibility is a major part of that. The demand is increasing, obviously, as our newcomer population increases, and resources are stable or decreasing, which I know I don't have to tell you. There's also been some additional changes in the last little while. Bill C-50 and C-45, which has given the federal government some arbitrary decision-making over who can and cannot come to Canada. And in addition, our governments have yet to fully recognize the legislative rights of status and non-status immigrant and refugees. These rights are guided by Canadian and international frameworks, and they're enshrined in such things as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Human Rights Codes, the Multiculturalism Act, and also they're affected by funder policies on diversity, equity, and non-discrimination. So part of our role in the sector is to influence government and funders to recognize the importance of immigration and to see this reflected in stable funding and policy approaches that value the contribution of newcomers. As we're well aware, this climate of uncertainty and instability spills into our organizations, and it can impact our ability to effectively address the root causes of issues that impact the entire system. Given this rate of change and the increasing complexity in our communities, a holistic and systemic approach can help ensure that settlement solutions are effective and that services are accessible and seamless as possible. And just the thought to take away, what unique challenges does your organization face? So OCASI had a study recently called the Making Ontario Home study, and it's actually quite a fascinating read. So we pulled out some of the key findings. The whole study is on the OrgWise site if you want to look it up. So, and again, these may not surprise you, but it's interesting to know what's come out of the sector at large. So employment is the highest concern. Limited English language skills is the second greatest challenge. 83% of respondents used one or more settlement support services. Counseling and advice are the most highly used, and that's very interesting finding. Recent newcomers are more likely to use services, and they tend to access them within the first year. The fifth finding we've highlighted is higher education newcomers are as likely to access overall services and more likely to access skills and employment training in the first year of arrival. And this probably won't surprise you. The sixth finding is no knowledge of settlement and integration services was the main reason for its non-use. And finally, better coordination is required for services impacting immigrants living with disabilities. So these findings really speak to the increasing need for settlement services and for us to approach our clients holistically. Immigrants and refugees who experience mental health issues, addictions, or homelessness, for instance, are often more marginalized as the challenges attached to being a newcomer intersect and compound their experiences. They often face barriers to accessing support, services, and resources, and in turn may feel isolated. These findings also speak to how there are structural and systemic barriers in place that are limiting immigrants and refugees in their ability to access upward social mobility, especially when it comes to being employed in the careers that they're trained in. All these are clear indicators that structural barriers are in place that can't be blamed solely on the downturn in the economy. Holistic and systemic approach can be successful because it builds on connecting community resources and harmonizing various social services. Combined settlement and support services provide effective solutions. It's also a way of ensuring that services be provided where clients are located, and this is important for accessibility. So we're just going to recap a key objective here of OCASI, and that is to support newcomers to meet their complex settlement needs by providing high-quality, relevant, and effective services. It's important, as we're reminded of this, that we remember to be aware of all those who require settlement services. whether they're status or non-status immigrants, whether they're temporary workers, or whether they're status or non-status refugees. And you may know this, but just to underline, because of government changes, there are more apt to be more non-status immigrants and refugees, for example. And these people are challenged to access basic health care, police protection, ESL, food bank, shelters, housing, and that's because they need to provide ID, and providing ID could lead to their deportation. So the thought to take away is, how does your role support these objectives, your role in your organization? So we're just going to set the stage a little bit. And there's some things that OCASI has in their organizational standards initiative about improving conditions for immigrants and refugees. So we're just going to go through them as a review. So first of all, that our organization addresses systemic issues that impact the lives of immigrants and refugees. Secondly, our organization is committed to anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility. Thirdly, our organization keeps informed about the barriers to accessing services that exist for a diverse range of immigrants and refugees. So the idea is to capture all of them, not just the mainstream. And fourth, our organization has made improvements and changes to address barriers facing immigrants and refugees that we have identified. So think about the areas that you and your organization are excelling in and which ones you need to improve in. So I'm going to pass to Laura Lee for the next portion of this. Laura Lee?
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. Let's look at first of OCASI standards that asks us to consider how our organization addresses systemic issues. But first, what do we mean by systemic issues? Well, systemic means affecting most or all of a system rather than a small portion of the system. So systemic problems arise because of the structure of the overall system. As a result, oppressions can be so embedded in Canadian culture and institutions that they're seen as normal or invisible. As we see in the day-to-day lives of our clients, systemic barriers prevent things such as equal opportunities, access to asylum, immigration opportunities, as James mentioned, education, jobs, housing, healthcare, and social services. Now, given the systemic nature of such issues, barriers and oppressions can often go unnoticed unless we come together as a community to raise awareness of them. Therefore, and we're going to say this time and time again, systemic problems require systemic solutions. Now, a systemic lens means looking at root causes to change the way an entire system works. It requires us to look at all aspects of human society as well as the environment and the context the issue resides in. So really, systemic is the level of thinking in which we need to start operating if we haven't already. And what's the reason for that? Well, we're all in this together. Problems are more effectively solved by pooling our knowledge, skills, and resources together. In this way, we can approach systemic issues and challenges holistically with the goal to correct or eliminate root causes, as opposed to merely addressing the immediately obvious symptoms, like providing Band-Aid solutions. This is a common terminology in that sense. Some questions we can begin to ask ourselves to think from a systemic lens are the following. Number one, what's the role programs and services play in the context of overall settlement services offered in our communities? Number two, how do programs and services impact other offerings in our communities? Number three, does my program or service provide temporary solutions to address immediate issues? And am I aware of solutions that can tackle the issue in the long term? Number four, where does my issue originate? What's the context? Who are the players? Is there a historical basis to what's happening right now, right in front of us? Number five, How does my issue interact with other concerns in the settlement sector? Now, thinking with a systemic lens is best achieved through collaboration and working together. It's really the best way to see the forest from the trees. Here are the particular indicators that Advocacy would like us to consider when it comes to a systemic approach. Number one is consider how staff time and resources are designated for advocacy aimed at changing social systems and legislation that impact negatively on newcomers. It's important to note that tone comes from the top. Leadership plays a key role in ensuring that anti-oppression is embedded and integrated in the organization as practice. Executive directors and boards of directors also play a key role in helping to define the organization's direction. Therefore, they can help in creating an inclusive environment and in making sure that anti-oppression practice is a norm. And they can demonstrate this commitment by supporting programs and practices that integrate an awareness of difference, diversity, and oppression. But really, regardless of our role in the organization, we can help inspire a climate and openness for change by supporting our peers, colleagues, and clients in understanding why equity is important within the organization and the communities we serve. A really good place to start is to find common ground. So now let's look at the second indicator. Consider how your organization has mechanisms to involve clients, community members, and stakeholders in your work to understand and change social systems, public policy, and/or legislation. In an earlier webinar in this series, we talked about how community engagement is part of our shared responsibility of strengthening communities. Today, we'll look at how community engagement and specifically reaching out to immigrants and refugees in our communities can help create a more equitable society. Community organizations like ours play a key role in the lives of newcomers because they can facilitate their first entry into civic participation. They can involve them in the very issues that affect them, and they can help them achieve equal participation in Canadian society. So let's now look at the third indicator. Consider how your organization engages in or supports to increase understanding and value of immigrants and refugees and the issues they face. Here too, community engagement and collaboration are key. We can reach out to other organizations and stakeholders in our communities to share resources, to collaborate, and to provide community development training, and also to strategize together to address systemic issues impacting newcomers. It's through the development of strong networks that we're able to raise awareness of value that immigrants and refugees bring to Canadian society. Therefore, an important way to demonstrate our commitment to addressing systemic issues is by dedicating our own staff time and resources towards advocacy. Well, what is advocacy? Well, in general, advocacy can be defined as speaking up. It's drawing attention to an issue and encouraging others to do the same. Advocacy means actively supporting a cause and getting others to support it as well. It's about making your views heard or acting on someone's behalf to make their views heard by people making decisions. Advocacy is effective for enabling, empowering, and encouraging people to become involved in public life. It can provide newcomers the opportunity to share their experiences about accessing social services, as well as providing a platform for them to suggest positive change and improvement. Advocacy can be done by one person or by a group. It can be done quietly in the background or even through loud demonstrations. It can involve meeting after meeting after meeting, or it can be done in one meeting, or even one telephone call, or maybe even one letter. Advocacy is based on understanding interests and working collaboratively to come up with solutions rather than on taking positions. When you advocate, the goal is to win support from others. It's really about strategic influencing. Advocacy and joint organizing can help remove systemic barriers experienced by newcomers and refugees on a day-to-day basis. Raising awareness of the need for improved access and services can help all of us in our efforts to secure increased funding and improve government policies. So, how do you support advocacy in your organization? Well, hopefully we've sold you on the importance of advocacy. Now let's look at how you can leverage stakeholder and community outreach to improve conditions for immigrants and refugees. So you're wondering, how do you get started with community advocacy? Well, number one, define your objectives and context. A good question to ask is, what is the issue you want to bring to the forefront? What would your coalition of community partners try to accomplish by coming together? You also have to define the context surrounding the issue. What's the political climate? Where's public opinion? Ask yourself if the community or Canadian public would be receptive to your message. Number two, identify stakeholders and possible allies. Now, think of other organizations or stakeholders that would benefit from your issue. This is really where you benefit from nurturing ongoing relationships with community partners and not simply ringing them up when you're in need. Chances are your community partners also have your issue on their radar. That said, really look beyond your usual partners, get creative in looking for allies. It's really cool to find the right mix. Coalitions of unlikely partners can be very powerful. It helps in getting people to sit up and notice your issue. Number three, recruit coalition partners. Before you reach out to potential partners, strategize first how you'll facilitate balance and maintain the relationships within the various groups in the coalition. What's key here is to be clear and straightforward in recruiting coalition partners. Tell them what's at stake for your organization and then show them how their organization can benefit by joining you. Like any relationship, effective advocacy can only happen in a climate of mutual respect. So inclusion is not just about inviting people to the table. It's really about genuinely welcoming and considering all points of view, regardless of a person's title or status or the nature of their organization. Number four, create a coalition structure. So now that you've got your coalition in place, the next step is to identify roles needed for the coalition to function, and then you assign those responsibilities. An important tip is to assign a coordinating function to one organization. And that's because you'll really need someone to hold and bring the group together and manage the communications. That said, create a communication network. It's really important to develop communication strategy and protocols. And that's because communication is really a top priority. So what you can do is identify a person who can be depended upon to do all internal communications with the coalition. It's really important to communicate often, openly, and with all coalition partners. You also have to identify a spokesperson for all public communication. Pick someone who's really good at distilling your issue in clear messages. Someone who can bring the right amount of passion and subject matter expertise. You want your audience to care about your message. You want your message to resonate with them. And most importantly, you want people to act. Number six, determine your message. When you're clear about your issue and what you're trying to accomplish, develop a message by, number one, keep it simple. Number two, keep it local. You can do this by leveraging your coalition members' networks and tailoring the coalition message to fit local audience. Number three, keep it relevant. The message should really reflect the concerns of the audience, the people you're trying to influence. And number four, repeat your message. Being an effective advocate is really about being well prepared. So do your research and gather all of the relevant information. And this way you'll be able to present your case in a clear and organized way. So yes, do consider mapping out your advocacy strategy. There are a lot of veteran community advocates out there, and it's a good investment of your time to reach out and learn from their experiences. Here are some effective practices that we've encountered in our journeys. Number one, be proactive. Build coalitions in good times. As mentioned earlier, don't wait until there's a critical issue. If your partners are already in place, it's easier to mobilize them in challenging times. Number two, formalize your coalition. It's best to make clear and direct agreements. Make sure that everyone understands what the responsibilities are. Clarity helps prevent conflicts. Number 3, be a good ally. That means be there when your partners need you. Coalitions require members to be there for each other even when the issue may not affect your organization. Number 4, find common ground. The most effective coalitions come together in response to a common issue. Make sure when you're developing group goals that it's done collaboratively and early when you're forming the coalition. This will really set the tone for how you'll work together moving forward. Number 5, respect differences. At the same time, understand and respect each group's differences and interests. You have to try to strike a balance between the goals and needs of the coalition and those of individual organizations, including your own. Respecting differences also means respecting each internal process that an organization has and taking this into account in your planning. Number 6, leverage diversity. There are lots of strengths within your coalition. Use the diversity of each organization or group. Not everyone will always agree with the coalition's actions, and sometimes, the minority might actually be right. So make sure to take everyone's opinion into account and use different points of view to energize the discussion, rather than using diversity as a source of division. Number 7, honor the process. Finding consensus is very important when making decisions as a coalition. Each group must listen to each other, debate, and discuss until they can find common ground. Successful coalitions, especially when starting up, spend much time and effort getting on the same page. So if you're stuck, start with the 5 W's, who, what, where, and how. Number 8, simplify your message. We've talked about this already. Number 9, communicate openly and freely with everyone. Make sure that all lines of communication within and among coalition members, with the media and with the community, are wide open. Open communication ensures that no one's left out. Number 10, document, document, document. Keep a record of everything, telephone calls, emails, letters, both to and from you, and meetings. Keeping records or documentation is a really important advocacy tool, because if you keep track of what's happened, what you've done, you'll be able to decide what to do next. Good records will help you make a stronger case. Number 11, create a crisis response committee and process. This committee will be prepared to respond to media requests and the need to make decisions any time of the day or night. This will help you keep issues from becoming emergencies. Number 12, share the accolades. Despite your level of involvement, never assume you know all of the details. So much can happen because of a spontaneous conversation or relationship you've just developed. Recognize every type of contribution. They're all important. Acknowledge everybody. Even if a partner didn't participate as you would have liked on the project, think long term. It's really the partnership that's important today and could be very meaningful in the future. That said, nurture your relationship. Advocacy is ongoing. Your partners, stakeholders, and officials shouldn't just hear from you at budget time or during a crisis. Building partnerships takes time and trust, and that takes time. Let's now move to OCASI's second indicator. How is your organization committed to anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility? There's not much information out there about applying an integrated anti-oppression framework, but OCASI has done a great job in pooling resources together to get you started. I invite all of you to visit the OrgWise website, especially the section under Improving Conditions for Immigrants and Refugees. Let's begin with a common definition of anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility. Anti-oppression involves recognizing and deconstructing the ways in which some groups experience systemic, institutional, and personal forms of disempowerment by others. It's about redressing the power imbalances in our communities and making us aware of our roles of power and privilege in society. With an anti-oppression model, people work together to rebuild existing systems so that everyone shares the benefits and opportunities of the system. Now, equity. Equity recognizes that the same rules applied to everyone will not always produce the same and equal results. And this is because different circumstances, diverse experience, and discriminations happened either historically or could even be happening today. We've seen how the lived realities of immigrants and refugees can be really complex, so we have to pay close attention to all the ways people are oppressed and marginalized. Accessibility is the degree to which a product, service, or environment is available to as many people as possible. So really, accessibility can be viewed as the ability to access and benefit from the system. So an integrated anti-oppression framework allows us to find ways to share access and power equally so that we're able to impact the overall system. Here are some questions to get you thinking from a systemic and anti-oppression framework. Are there ways in which my services or programs remove barriers for some people, yet perpetuate oppression for others? Number 2, are groups or individuals impacted by my programs or services differently? And if so, do I need to take steps to alleviate any negative effects to ensure that the needs of all newcomers are met? And number 3, does my program help some people but reinforce the marginalization of others, whether historic or current? Thinking from a systemic and anti-framework is like learning a new skill, so it's really understandable if you feel challenged. So let's now look at the indicators for demonstrating this commitment to anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility. Number 1, consider how principles and values include a commitment to anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility in program and service delivery within your organization. Number 2, consider how your organization is guided by an anti-oppression policy and implementation plan. Number 3, consider how your organization embeds anti-oppression in all aspects of its operation. Number 4, consider how your organization periodically reviews your anti-oppression policy or plan and gets stakeholder feedback and makes necessary changes. Number 5, consider how your organization demonstrates a commitment to anti-oppression when setting organizational program and service delivery priorities. Now, in identifying these indicators, Advocacy clearly states that the language each organization uses to describe this commitment may be different, but the point here is a commitment to operating and serving immigrants and refugees in a way that acknowledges and attempts to address systemic issues. So really, its commitment is the key. And I understand that this commitment to anti-oppression can be daunting, especially when faced with limited funds and an increasing workload. And because of that, anti-oppression work and thinking can fall off the radar. Sometimes it's even considered admin or HR function. But when policies don't reflect an anti-oppression approach, they can be ineffective for our clients, mostly because they don't capture their lived realities and layered complexities. But when we create policies using an anti-oppression analysis or framework, there's a stronger chance that our programs and services will become more relevant, current, and effective. So here's the thing, be patient. Working with an integrated anti-oppression framework requires time, commitment, and effort. On a daily basis, we're looking how systemic oppression is experienced and perpetuated at the same time. This is why the work is ongoing. Charting new territory is not an easy task, but it will be rewarding when our services effectively meet our clients. We understand how developing and revising policies can be overwhelming. Hopefully we've convinced you how important it is to analyze and revise them regularly as new knowledge, data, and information come in. That said, we don't need to start from square one. We can learn from other organizations that have initiated this journey already. The United Way has developed a useful 5-step process to get you started. Number 1, set a schedule for revising policies and reviewing them. Number 2, create a work plan. Number 3, set up a policy review committee. Number 4, review the organization's policies. Number 5, make recommendations, both short and long-term ones. Here are a few other tips. Start from the integrated and interlocking nature of oppressions as opposed to trying to have a different policy for each marginalized groups. Number 2, remember that many minds are better than one. Create a permanent or ongoing committee tasked with reviewing and developing policies. This will ensure you stay on top with what's current in your sector while helping you to table issues from perspectives or different social locations. These discussions require a lot of sensitivity and commitment. Together, you might be unpacking and grading systems and ways of doing things. So create an open, inclusive, and well-intentioned work environment so that people won't be afraid to analyze critically and constructively for real change to take place. At times, we might have to hear how individuals and organizations oppress others in spite of our positive intentions. So some conflict and hearty debates may in fact be part of your journey, but this is also a strong sign of engagement and conflict. So see it in a positive light. You can leverage discussions for your overall learning. And now over to James.
Thank you very much, Laura Lee. So we're moving on to part 3 of our session. Does your organization stay informed about the barriers to accessing services that exist for a diverse range of immigrants and refugees? So as we've discussed, one of the best ways to stay current on these issues, the ones that impact your clients, is to stay rooted in your community. And we do that by nurturing relationships with clients and stakeholders on a continuing basis. Sharing information and service models within the community and with our community partners within the sector will help us stay current in the long run. Scarce resources and limited funding often pits us against each other, but it would be in all of our interests to act, share, and advocate more cohesively and in a supportive manner. This can only result in more effective dissemination of information, sharing of issues and research with regard to barriers and services, as well as improvements to programming, including cross-referrals. It's a win-win as we succeed in providing effective, ongoing, and seamless support for newcomers. Organizations are often at different places and levels in their learning and understanding. Be open to learning from others and be generous in sharing what you know. Gently challenge yourself to keep learning and to help others do the same. Approach everyone as a potential ally. It's up to us to promote open dialogue, to increase awareness and to develop best practices in support of newcomers while addressing the systemic barriers to accessing these services. So we're going to look at some more of Advocacy's standard indicators. So first of all, consider how your organization understands the diversity and complexity within your community and as mechanisms to identify barriers to accessing services. We've seen how immigrants and refugees are faced with an array of multifaceted, multi-layered challenges and barriers when they try to access services in Canada. As service providers, we need to bear these challenges in mind when we're working with immigrants and refugees, as well as work towards ongoing training to ensure that their needs are being met at various levels and in a sensitive and appropriate manner. Secondly, consider how your organization seeks input on service barriers facing a diverse range of members within the immigrant and refugee community. And here's a list of some examples. So Advocacy is reminding us to ensure we have mechanisms to identify barriers to accessing services for these diverse range of identities and needs in the immigrant and refugee communities. And we've talked about these before. The mechanisms you can use can be focus groups, surveys, dialogues, open houses, interviews, anything that encourages a dialogue. We dealt with some of this 2 seminars ago in our seminar called Strengthening Communities. If you want to take a look back at that or look at that for the first time, we'll give you some deeper information on community engagement. So something to underscore again when you're reaching out to immigrants and refugees is that this is not a homogeneous group. They have diverse experiences and intersecting identities, and these speak to the complexity and variance of perspectives and needs. And we need to keep this in mind when we're engaging people to uncover feedback on policies, programs, and services. You may need to speak to a variety of people and from people from different social locations to get the full picture. It's also important to remember that to balance the needs of individuals and organizations, resources need to be available to address the lack of language skills, to create new avenues for participation, to link volunteers with other people and activities that fulfill their aspirations. This could mean creating new volunteer programs, working directly with your clients to ensure that the physical location of your agency is accessible and as welcoming as possible. It can also mean connecting your clients and community members to other organizations that speak more to their needs and interests, and that is very important. Be open to new programs that emerge from leveraging the skills and talent in your communities and in making use of shared assets. So some ways to stay informed. So we've actually shared this slide in a previous webinar because it looks at practical ways to create a sense of community through participation and engagement. So we're just going to run through it again. So staying informed and engaged starts with an honest dialogue, which may include sharing best practices formally or informally. Find opportunities to publish and share the things that are working well, the practices that others can replicate or be inspired by. And you can do this through newsletters, your website, through your organization, through events or other organic means. Ask what clients need through focus groups and surveys, for example. And we talked about this in webinar number 1, where we looked at evaluation and the importance of soliciting feedback. This is yet another benefit that comes from soliciting feedback. You don't have to do it twice, you just do it once. Thirdly, look at pockets of success and replicate. Show others how to replicate and encourage others to replicate. Provide incentives for replication, even fun contests or awards. Define expectations and plan to deliver on them. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. We have a question. And the question is, why does Ocasio choose anti-oppression with all its socialist, communist connotations instead of inclusion or other positive concepts to promote the approach? Just thinking about promoting something that implies a negative word as anti does versus a positive word. It's a very good question, actually. I can't speak for Ocasio because I didn't choose the phrase. It's commonly used in the sector, and I'm sure you've come across it in other places. You, of course, can turn this around into a positive phrase. I'm not sure that the fact that it's negative does have connotations of socialist and communist aspects, but I think that depends on our experience and where we come from. Laura Lee, would you like to add anything?
I would say, too, as well, that it really, as James mentioned, it really does speak to the experience of people, and you have to look at your audience. So if those terms are alienating to them, then there's a way of also communicating to them in a way that you're using language where they feel that it's inclusive for them. So I think Ocasio used that as a guiding principles, and I think it's the spirit behind what they were trying to convey with that. And I'm sure Ocasio would be, in terms of developing these org-wide standards, would also be pleased to provide a response to this as well. But I think it's really about ensuring that the language we are using is inclusive when we are targeting it to the audience that we're working with. And it is up to us to know our audience really well and understand what language it is where they feel included. So I think that point is very well taken if you're working with your clients and seeing if those language, depending on their experience, alienates them or makes them feel included.
Thanks, Laura Lee. I hope between the two of us that that gives you some answer to this question. And as Laura Lee said, in terms of Ocasio's use of the question, if you want to pursue it further, you could ask them. I'm just going to carry on. And just following up on ways to stay informed, some additional thoughts on whether you encourage regular dialogue with your clients, with the private sector, with your broader community. And finally, to wrap this up, the thought to take away is how do you stay informed and how do you make the necessary change to support your clients' evolving needs. So we're going to just look for a little bit at whether your organization makes improvements and changes to address the barriers facing immigrants and refugees. Most organizations cannot afford to make radical changes all at once to their frameworks and their programs. As with any structural change, organizations need to create a plan to phase in the change. So we looked at some of this in the first webinar in the series, which was entitled Embracing Evaluation, and you can go back and look at that on the OrgWise site. We're going to look at some more of the OCASI indicators. So, and consider if your organization has a plan and it sets time and resources to address barriers. We're all aware how things get done when a plan is in place, and in this case, one that sets time and resources to address the barriers is particularly valuable. Your plan should include clear guidelines, should name who's accountable, it should allocate funds from the budget. The plan should also include priorities, a risk and benefit analysis of what you hope to achieve, and the steps to meet your goals. So, does your organization keep a written record of improvements in service accessibility? Again, we've talked about this before in a slightly different context. Keeping a written record is very valuable for a number of reasons. It's good also to, as good as staff comes through the organization, it's good to look back and see how far you come and celebrate your successes a little bit. So consider if your organization targets and documents improvements to services accessed by immigrants and refugees with more diverse identities and life experiences. And this is one of the specific things we're talking about in this webinar, is making sure that that things are applied equitably and they reach everybody and they are accessible to everybody. And finally, consider if your organization is considered a welcoming space by your clients. And a final reminder to integrate, and here's this word again, an anti-oppression approach in your planning, and that you keep in mind the intersecting identities and multi-layered experiences of your clients. So finally, final thought, how do you gauge progress? How do you ensure a culture of continuous improvement? So OrgWise sets out an action plan as a template, which we're going to just take you through. It's a very good tool here to help you get started, and it sort of helps you to analyze what your situation is in order to figure out how you want to improve things, how you want to move ahead. I'm just going to briefly take you through this. It sets out 4 points and then gives you thoughts on how you want to analyze each of those points. So the first point on the left is our organization addresses systemic issues that impact the lives of immigrants and refugees. So to analyze that, you consider articulating how you do this, what systemic issues have been identified, what's the short and long-term plan to address them, and also have you collaborated with other agencies. Second column, second point is our organization is committed to anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility. So think about how you are committed to these areas. Who is responsible within your organization? And you can also draft a roles and responsibility chart to formalize this. Consider how you track changes year over year, how you keep up to date on most relevant issues, and whether or not you solicit client feedback. And we talked about that earlier in this webinar as well. Third thing, our organization keeps informed about the barriers to accessing services that exist for a diverse range of immigrants and refugees. So how do you keep up to date? How do you share information within your organization? Do you have relationships with all the right stakeholders externally? And something that you can do to help kind of sort through that is by creating a relationship map that kind of lays it out and makes it easier to see what you have and what you might be missing. And finally, our organization has made improvements and changes to address barriers facing immigrants and refugees that we've identified. So what are we excelling at? What areas do we need to improve in? Have we included these gaps in our annual plan or in our quarterly or monthly touch points? Who's accountable for each of these indicators in our organization? That's very useful to go through that exercise. And again, we've said many times, we strongly encourage you to partner, to consider partnering with another organization in the spirit of further engagement and community involvement. So we've come to the end. If there's more questions, we have an upcoming Q&A session on Friday, this coming Friday the 19th at 10 a.m. And I think you'll get a notice on this as well. If you have a success story, you can also send things along to Advocacy following the session today. And if you have a success story to share, please consider including that as well in the spirit of mutual support and knowledge exchange. And feel free as well to contact us at Direct Communications if you'd like to follow up in any way on any of this information, or if there's anything we can do to help you. And finally, here's a list of some of the resources that we've used today. Some of these are on the OrgWise site. The first one, an integrated anti-oppression framework for reviewing and developing policy, is a United Way document, and it's on the United Way site. It's very valuable, and you'll find lots of things there. You'll find things as well on Imagine Canada site, which we haven't used today, but we have in the past. And there's a huge wealth of material on the OrgWise site, as I'm sure you know. As we've also mentioned, there were 3 other webinars in this series, and there's another of other webinars that that Advocacy has been organizing that are there on a multiplicity of topics that are really extremely valuable. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. It's been a real pleasure presenting today's webinar.